It's not often that I say, Fergus, welcome to the podcast without having a slip of the tongue or deciding that I'm going to start speaking about myself in the third person. But Fergus, welcome to the podcast. How are we doing?
We're doing good. This is going to be a little bit unusual because Fergus, it's going to be almost like we're talking to ourselves. And that's the first sign of madness, isn't it?
I think so. This might be just a well-documented delivery of us descending into madness, but we'll try and keep it.
Or this is the ultimate evolution of AI.
This is it. This is just the future looking back.
Yeah.
It was just speaking to one another, really. So it's alternative realities. This is what it is. But I think we'll rather than going down the long rabbit hole that is AI in the modern world, we'll talk about performance, which is something that you are exceptionally well versed in, and a statistic that I really enjoy, given my fascination by sports and the downstream benefits that come from it, is, am I right in saying that you are the only high performance coach that's worked in every major league across the major sports in the world for the most part?
Full time, yeah, I think so. Yeah, full time, yeah. So that's been a journey, an interesting comparison as well. Soccer, rugby, NFL. I've consulted in all of them. Consulted in cricket, as you mentioned earlier, and as you can tell from my accent, I know very little about cricket. With Cricket Australia, but yeah, it's been a fascinating journey getting to work in those. Incredibly fortunate to get the opportunity to work in those sports.
I can only imagine. I think what I'm really keen to understand today is what the thread of DNA that runs through all of those things that essentially, I guess, is broadly applicable in a general sense, because high performance is a relative term to the metrics and focus points that a team is aiming to achieve. But I guess some of the mechanisms and the methods and the things that you look for to enact within those roles could be more generally applicable than people might give credit for. But we'll come on to that because I think it's important to give a bit of context as to, for those listening that might not know your background, exactly what it is. How did this become the full-time role within many, many sports across many, many nations?
You can tell me this. So many of your guests, told you that they had a plan. I had no plan. My plan was to become a woodwork and a construction studies teacher like my father. That's what I was going to do. I grew up along the border in Ireland during the 80s, during an interesting time. My plan was to be a teacher. So I went to university. I did my 4-year degree. I just turned 21, and I figured, you know what, this university lark it's okay. It's pretty comfortable. So why don't I stay on and do a master's, and I can put a few letters after my name. And I stayed on. I did a master's in manufacturing. I did a PhD in computer-based optimization. And the great thing about the university was they had, it was the University of Limerick. It was the first university in Ireland to have like a sports science program. And sport was an incredible hobby for me. So I would go and spend time reading about physiology and psychology because I was playing sport, playing Gaelic football. And so many people thought that I was actually studying physical education or sports science. I would spend that much time in there. And I just loved learning. Somebody, I think, told me when I was young that if I could do anything I wanted if I worked hard enough at it, and I stupidly believed them. And so that my passion was sport, stayed on at university, and then I would, the internet's just starting, emails just coming out. So I would, on a Sunday, I would buy 3 Sunday newspapers, the broadsheets, and I would read the interviews of the athletes that were there at the time. And I would look to try and find the coaches. Who were the coaches? And then I would try and email the coach. Can I come and learn from you? And that's how it started. And nobody ever said no. No coach ever said no. And I would travel in any time I had holiday time, vacation time. I would travel around the world to find the best people just to learn about sport. That's how it started.
Where did the fascination with finding the coaches rather than the athletes come from, do you think? Was it the craft of creating the output from the sort of the top of funnel, I guess, in some ways, the sort of downstream effect? Because most people will grow up playing sport and want to be a professional footballer, a professional cricketer. I guess it's probably a bit more rare to want to be the people coaching those people. So where do you think that fascination came from?
It's a great question. I've never been asked that before. I think it came from just my upbringing, that the learning to look behind the curtain, scrape away the superficial layer and then find out what makes somebody great. And so the coach was someone that I was always drawn to. Like, they could have greater insight, or they might have more than one athlete and they could tell me more. They could give me a greater insight. Not that the athlete couldn't, but sometimes the best athletes don't think, but the coach is the one who's helping them solve problems. And I think that's what drew me to it. Like, what's the formula here?
I get the fascination in many ways, because I'm not as competitive now as I was in my younger years. I just kind of enjoy the process of learning and developing and understanding the why and how that can be applied elsewhere. And I kind of get a bit confused when I see people that are so hyper competitive at a certain point. I'm just like, I just don't feel that way. So I think it's important to understand, because there will be people that would expect the aspirations growing up to be, if you get the papers, it's right, who scored the goals, who's done this, who's done that. But I think behind the curtain is where sport really comes alive, and why sport has the impact that it does, because the teams, the mechanisms, the commerciality, all the stuff that goes into it, that's where sport as a business and sport as a movement for change is actually really fascinating. That's where I'm most fascinated with it at its core, as I'm sure you are in many ways. And you've seen behind many curtains over the years. And I think I'm going to put you on the spot immediately and say, of all the sports that you've been behind the curtain on, which is your favourite?
Of all the sports, rugby, I think, is the one that I enjoyed and learned the most. And if you want to go further, Munster Rugby was probably the one that I consulted them for, I think, 2 years, and that was a great experience. That was having been around the All Blacks, that was the one that I still think the culture at Munster Rugby at the time when I was there, possibly still is, was the most impressive. It was you used the word earlier when you were talking about Gaz, but there's an authenticity about it that, to me, is critical for performance, critical for high performance.
Do you believe high performance is objective or subjective within the realm of sport? Is it something that any team, any group of individuals can be molded to become, or is it the inputs that make the outcome?
Okay, so is it bought, taught, or caught?
Yes,
it's definitely taught. You can create that environment, and you can build that culture, and you can bring people in who are not aligned per se with it, and they will be drawn into it. Now, there's a limit, of course, to how many. Like the ratio that I have is 1:15. You can bring in somebody who maybe is not aligned. If you've got 15 good people, you can pull them. So in a squad of 30, it's 2, 45, 3. And that culture that magnet will keep them aligned in that group.
Do you think that applies to settings out with sport, in C-suites, in teams, in departments? Is it something that you've seen become quite constant? And therefore, I guess the core of the question is what I was kind of curious to unpack today originally is high performance, is there a thread of DNA? Is there a core to it that the average person listening, or the elite person listening, or the person that's completely at the beginning of their journey, they can develop and mold themselves to become?
Absolutely. Like, I've thought about this quite a bit. I could possibly argue with you that everything is a skill. If you can practice it, learn it, and retain it, develop it, it's a skill. There are very, very few things I would consider not a skill. In other words, that you can't learn. And the corollary of that is that if you don't continue to practice it, you lose it. And I'm talking about whether it be disciplines, even emotions, empathy, or your desire to support and care for people. Those are all skills. And if you don't practice them, you will lose them. So yes, you can learn the skills necessary and the behaviors necessary for a high performance environment, without a doubt.
It's encouraging to hear, because I think that the phrase high performance and mindset and all these very popular terms at the moment get thrown around in so many ways. And I think actually the simplification of it makes it quite an empowering thing to hear, because it means that just by doing the reps, acknowledging that skills are there to be developed, but they can also go dormant, means that we have so much more control over becoming the person that we want to be. And as you said, having total faith in the fact that whatever you work hard towards is what you can become, which is it can become what was once a reality for people, can feel like a fairy tale after enough punches in the face from the universe, because you will get punched in the face from the universe, won't you?
Absolutely. And I think, I forget, is it 15 years ago, there were a whole load of studies on genetics, and people were identifying genes and going, okay. And then people started to reflect more on epigenetics. Brilliant, because that period where everybody was doing so much research just solely on genetics, people were kind of going, oh, well, I mustn't have the gene for that. No, you can develop the skills. And I describe that as it's like a 100-meter race. Yes, some blocks might be a few inches behind someone else's, but that's your genes. That's the starting point. The race, the training, that's your epigenetics. That's what you choose to do, the behaviors. And yeah, you can develop any of those skills. The other point is, what else are you going to do? What other mindset are you going to have going into life? What do you do? Give up? No. There are skills that perhaps if I call them they're limiting factors. In our life, we have things that we have. It could be communication. I'm a poor communicator. Could be a limiting factor. Well, you can work on that. You can develop that skill. You can improve it. You might not be the world's best communicator, but you can improve it. It's a skill. The
core components of high performance and human behavior, I guess, that you've observed across the teams that you've worked with. Are there any key moments along the way, any key games, any key championships, any key things where you felt that you learned something really integral to high performance within the team setting? Because I can imagine there's been some expectations that you've had, there's been some theory, and then you've seen it unfold in practice in situations within these teams. Because, especially in the NFL, the amount of people, the amount of inputs that go into that pitch and that performance and that result is just mind-blowing, because the commerciality, the sponsors, keeping everybody happy, the politics. One, I guess, from a curiosity point of view, how is that all managed? But more importantly, what did you learn from working with the San Francisco 49ers at that level? Because I can imagine them working with a smaller team, that becomes much easier.
You're right, absolutely. In a funny way, the smaller the organization, the more adaptable and the easier it is to have an impact. One of the things that you mentioned, though, about in the NFL, for example, is there are very, very few NFL players at any point in time. So when you think of the US and the talent available and the selection available, to make it to an NFL team, you are already incredibly talented. You've been playing the sport for a number of years. So the development pathway then is very, very different from many other sports where maybe you've got a smaller selection. And so that's one of the big differences. If you're in a smaller nation and you need to invest more of your time in developing talent, you can't just, scratch someone, go out and pick from the masses. So the NFL is a very, very different sport in that regard than, for example, soccer perhaps, or international rugby. That's probably a great example. If you look at Wales, Scotland, Ireland or England, and you look at just the the choice, the range, the numbers that they have to choose from. And that's when development becomes so much more important. So that's where talent development becomes more important than talent ID.
Okay, so in terms of in a practical setting, how you would approach those two. So talent development and talent ID are the two components to reflect on. And what is the work required with each of those components in terms of the variability?
Yeah, so with talent ID, then you've got a wider range. You need to be far more astute in terms of understanding what you're looking for your environment. It's like the seed and the soil. Certain teams in their soil culture are very, very good at perhaps they've got a very good culture perhaps, or they've got a very good medical department, a very good strength and conditioning department. So you can afford then to go, this guy's perfect in every area, except he's had a poor medical history. We've got a brilliant medical team. We can bring him in, we can rehab him, and we can prolong his career, or same with strength or speed or whatever. So that's in terms of talent ID. In terms of talent development, if you have a smaller organization, you need to invest a lot more in developing your coaches so that they become so good that they can spot those limiting factors, develop the player, and create that culture. And you can't afford to take as many risks because you're not going to be able to replace your asset, your talent.
Okay. That's very interesting because it actually really aligns with something that Gaz told me years and years ago. It was actually on this podcast. He was episode number 2, I believe he was, in fact. So a while ago now, but he spoke about Special Forces selection and how the DS and recruitment staff specifically don't expect you to arrive as the finished article. They simply expect you to arrive with the minerals required to earn the right to be taught the skills and development required to become the Special Forces soldier that you are there to believe that you are. And he says often the thing that gets in the way the most is the egotistical attitude that people believe that they arrive at the finished article, or that they've got nothing left to learn, or that they're not actually just malleable within a new environment to become what they believe themselves to want to become. And I guess that's in many ways the differentiation there, where talent ID is spotting right who's got the foundations required to thrive within this culture, and then what are the things available within our arsenal of tools that we can apply to this person to bring out the best in them. And that's going to be different individual to individual, isn't it? And that's where
that's a brilliant point, because you're looking for certain characteristics and behaviors that are the, like you said, the minerals. Is that from Snatch? Tommy, have you got the minerals? But you know, the like, have you got those basic minerals? Because, like you said, the person doesn't come in past selection and plateau. No, that's the starting point. And you're looking for things like humility. You're looking for a desire to improve. You're looking for a curious mind. You're looking for a mind that thinks critically, that you can grow. And the most the key thing, the key differentiator for me between, you know, good and great is, can you sustain the rate of success? So when you're looking for those minerals, is this someone that's going to keep improving? That's key, as opposed to, you know, off past selection. I can go down the pub and tell my mates down Hereford. You know what I mean? Like, no, you're not looking for that.
So what are the characteristics or the green flags that you'd be looking for in an individual or a team setting to imply or indicate, because I guess it's just the best guess, it's trial and error with these things, who is going to be capable of continually improving, and who are the people that will hit the plateau once they get through the first stage?
Even today, I would imagine that if you asked, like I said, you know, guys in Virginia Beach or in Hereford, they would tell you there is no like set criteria, but there are things that you're looking for. For me, it's, you know, I always talk about Triple H. You're looking for honesty, like a brutal honesty, not a fake oh, I'm terrible at everything, but like a brutal honesty in terms of how they view themselves. Could have done better. That wasn't good enough, or I did do well. Like that honesty, hard work, like quality hard work. Not, everybody's going to have to suffer at a certain point, but also the willingness to put in quality work, and then humility. And humility to me is the most critical one of all, because that underpins your ability to avoid complacency, arrogance, carelessness. So those are the three H's that I think are the starting point.
Honesty and humility on premise seem opposed to ego, whereas competitiveness in many ways is born out of ego. Mm-hmm. So given your experience, how do you balance that potential for disparity there? When is ego useful? When is ego damaging or limiting?
Yeah. So this is a really, really important point. Humility can be a virtue or a vice. And so it's finding a balance. It's on a continuum. An excessive amount of humility ends up being a vice. You become unsure of oneself. You're constantly self-deprecating. And so it's finding that balance of being humble enough. One of the rules, at Hereford, for example, is that you never walk past a piece of litter. And the reason for that is to underpin the concept that you are as good as anyone else, but you're not you are as good as anyone else, but you're no better than anyone else. You're different, but you are no better. So it's finding that balance with all of those things. And you're right, you need a certain amount of ego, but an excessive amount of humility can be as dangerous. And I see that, but I tend to see that later with elite performers. Because early on in your career, you drive yourself exceptionally hard. And part of that internally is this voice that says, I should have done better than this person. I should have done better. After many, many years of that voice being very, very productive for you, it can become very, very loud. And so it's having that balance that it doesn't become a detriment to your performance.
I guess you'd never want to lose the ability to be proud of the performance if something did come together on the day. If all the boxes were ticked, if you nailed it, if everything was done in the way that should have been done, you wouldn't want to then be hypercritical and therefore always feel like you're falling short.
Yeah, and that's where that honesty comes in, is to be honest enough. Again, that's what we're saying, not a fake honesty, but to be honest enough. No, I did do damn good there. I did. That was good. And to have that balance between the two.
So I guess if you were to enter an organisation, this might have happened in the past. If there is an example, then I'd love to hear more about it. But if you were to enter a team that everybody was intrinsically dishonest, looking out for themselves, they thought they were better than the player next to them, there wasn't an effective communication between the coaches and the athletes, how would you go about addressing that within that as a culture? Where is the starting point? Because culture is a huge one. I've been in companies where the culture didn't strike me as the most positive place in the world. I've got friends that work in companies in London where it might not be the most positive place in the world. I've got friends that have been in sporting environments that will tell you a lot about how the culture is not actually designed to help the players thrive. It's designed to pretend that it's there to help the players thrive, but it's actually just there to keep the year-on-year churn going so that they can keep the lights on and keep everyone getting results. Loyalty, I think in sport, is a dirty word because it's often thrown at players and not necessarily received in the way that they expect it to, when it actually comes to right now is the time to show the loyalty and deliver the loyalty. So culture as a whole is so difficult to comprehend, but if we're working from that starting point of the other end of the spectrum of what you'd be looking for in an ideal team environment, what would your first practical steps be?
Oh man, you've covered so many things there, so many good points. Just on the loyalty thing, that is something that I think many fans don't appreciate. You know, they see players perhaps make decisions and they accuse the player of disloyalty without perhaps considering, well, you know, how much loyalty has that player experienced from ownership or whatever. And particularly as sport has become so much more commercial and there's so much more, like we spoke about talent ID and talent development, you're moving into a phase now where it's about brand ID and brand development in terms of the player. And that goes beyond the organization. So now you will have young players coming through an academy into a first team or into the NFL or whatever. They have a brand. And I think so that you've got that whole dynamic around it. With organizations that don't have that honesty and authenticity, you're never going to be truly successful. So you've got two options. You either have a huge turnover and you keep the myth going, or you change leadership. You've got this one or two. Those are the only two options if you want to keep it going. In some businesses, you can get away with it because you have two metrics. I'm trying to use the best example so I don't throw anybody necessarily under the bus. But if you actually, the Deloitte financial report just came out this morning looking at, European soccer and the Premier League. If you look at wins, losses, so what metrics are, say, Premier League teams measured by? Are they measured by wins and losses or profit and loss? And there's no correlation between the two. So what's the goal for the organization? Like, so when you sit down, what's the goal? Is it profit and loss? Is it debt? Is it wins and losses? There's no correlation. Same in the NFL, actually. The top 5 most valuable teams, I think, are the Dallas Cowboys, the New York Giants. I think the 49ers are up there, the Patriots. Like, I think there's only 4 of them have won a Super Bowl since God was a carpenter. You know what I mean? So there's no correlation between value and success. So what is the metric? Is the metric winning, or is it the value of the team, the brand? So it's an interesting thing for people just to keep in mind.
That's fascinating. And nothing frustrates me more than how little understanding is given to the inner workings of the organizations that people idolize or pedestalize. Great example.
You have a better understanding than many people I've spoken to.
Well, it's something. It's always what's annoyed me about football or soccer, depending on what side of the world you're on. So, topical example, and something that I'm very fascinated by. Have you seen the docuseries about Wrexham AFC?
No.
You haven't. I would recommend it. I think it's one of the best docuseries ever made, personally.
At least you didn't ask me about Ted Lasso.
I haven't actually seen that. But Wrexham family grew up just over the border in the Wirral, so we've got friends from Wrexham. I've been to Wrexham growing up. I've played football on some of the pitches that have appeared in this Welsh mining town, and I think what has blown my mind is how quickly 2 Americans and some eyeballs have completely blown apart convention in terms of that space commercially, in terms of loyal fans, in terms of fans traveling, in terms of commitment, in terms of just the opportunity that's gone with it. And then downstream of that, from a sort of just general sentimental nice point of view, the people of the town, where the football club is everything for them. So, I mean, the NFL versus, let's look at the Premiership rugby in the UK. Commercially, they're just totally different beasts. And you've worked in basically all major sporting nations. What is it about America that makes it so much better at commercialising sport than the rest of the world? Because the Prem rugby in the UK is not in a good place. I know Ireland's in a slightly better place, but that's because homegrown talent and everything's kept quite close, and obviously the Irish Rugby Union are in a good place as a whole. Australia, unions on the decline. New Zealand, unions on the decline now for the first time ever because gaming and the NBA have overtaken it statistically, hasn't it? Because I think there's one Kiwi NBA player that's gone over there. So is there other than rampant capitalism, is there something about the approach to performance and growth and those metrics, more importantly, in America versus the rest of the world that they do differently?
I said this quite a few years ago, which a lot of people didn't quite appreciate at the time. To me, the most advanced sport in the world is WWE wrestling, because they realized that they're not in an actual performance or sport, they're in the entertainment business. And so when you get to that elite level, for me, the sport flips from being about performance and health and wellness and all of that to becoming about entertainment. And that's what's about. Can you sell a story? So when you watch ESPN or Sky Sports, what percentage of the time is about the actual game, or it's about, league points or whatever, fines, that. So if you want to create a business and a brand, like you spoke about Wrexham, it's the entertainment value. Now, that's not a bad thing, but where it does become something, I think that I'm somewhat, I guess, somewhat concerned is from a societal and a community perspective. Sport is not about that. Sport's about teaching young people life lessons, or lessons that they can carry through in life. And so it's just being able to separate that, I think, from a societal and a cultural perspective. And so, you talk about rugby in New Zealand and even rugby in Wales, for example. Really, you want to impact the kids. You want kids to play the sport so they can learn, lessons around resilience, around skill, teamwork, culture, all of those things. But at the elite end, if you will, it's entertainment. And their competition, as you alluded to, is not, the competition, the NFL competition is not between, the Giants and the Browns. It's between the NFL and the NBA. Who can pull in more of that? And that's really what it comes down to.
Fascinating way of looking at things. I guess the way things are in the UK rugby anyway is that the entertainment that comes from the players, like Finn Russell, I hope that the way that he plays 10 years downstream of that are going to be lots of absolute maverick 10s at the age of 13 years old. But what the UK does really poorly is potentially cultivate play like that, and then the things around the fringes that make the spectacle of let's go and watch Finn Russell be a madman with a rugby ball at Bath now, or wherever he's been in the past. All of that stuff doesn't have the same glitz and glamour that the NFL does, but I know that a lot of fans don't want that. But a lot of fans are also a little bit blissfully unaware that the game is crumbling around them, which is the challenge in and of itself. So I think the WWE point is fascinating because you're bang on. Essentially, it's not a sport on premise, but the commercialization of it creates an entertainment cycle that then allows the entertainment cycle to grow and grow and grow and grow. And that's actually happening in the inverse with some of the sports that we know and love, which, as you said, develop the character in the kids that allows them to become malleable, to become high performers. So,
yeah, I was at I forget where it was. It was either Bolton or I think it was Walter Smith or someone having lunch or whatever. Somebody made the comment, Sky Sports is on. Somebody made the comment, "Oh, Sky would be absolutely screwed, if the Premier League pulled out." Like they were debating the contract. Walter Smith he said, "Sky Sports would be screwed." He said, "The Premier League would be screwed if Sky Sports pulled out." We had reached that tipping point where the broadcasting money was of so much value to the sport, and so I think when you talk about rugby, I think it's at an interesting challenge where you want to protect the game. Rugby's an amazing game, a really important game for the UK, for England, Wales, Scotland in particular, and but there also has to be a realization that the commercial aspect of it has to be balanced. Otherwise, there's no funding. If you've no funding, it's not a vicious circle. But you need that money to promote the game, and you need storylines around it. You do need player engagement to help sell stories. People want to know. People want to feel part of it, and so that's how you ensure that the sport stays relevant to people.
And I very much hope that it does, because there's in every sport that you've been a part of, they're all very, very valuable intrinsically for the people playing them. And if you don't need to look at people playing for the New York Giants or any competitive teams at that level, but if you look at the people playing at under 15s, that's where a lot of the value really is. So the holistic philosophy that you lay out in Game Changer, that you think helps essentially present the foundation for high performance, what does that look like as a blueprint?
So when I started to write Game Changer, when I left, I started in soccer, then went to rugby, went from Bolton Wanderers to the Welsh Rugby Union, and I was I wouldn't say depressed, but I was going, oh my God, I never really played much soccer growing up. Now I'm going to rugby. I've never been in a rugby game in my life. And it was so uncomfortable. But those moments of discomfort, that was when I started to realize, hang on, the human is the same. All of the keys on the piano are present, but they're played differently. So strength is present, but not as important in football, speed, skill. And so in that moment of discomfort was when I started to realize, well, the human's the same. All the qualities are present, same in the NFL then later on. So what does the model of the human look like? And then how do you understand how to develop that? And previous to that, people just looked at sports in isolation, or many did. You have to know football. You can only be a football coach. So Game Changer just allowed me create a model that was universal across all the sports and identify those keys and then go, okay, now we know what all those keys might be. So the physical, psychological, tactical, and technical. And then, okay, how do we develop them? And the interesting thing is that, even when it comes down to skill development, the principles are going to be the same. So how I develop skill in a soccer player is going to be principle-wise the same as I would develop in rugby or in the SF community, like if you're teaching shooting, or then in a team environment, close quarter battle is the same. You've got groups of people moving in unison. So the principles are the same. And so when you take a step back, you realize, the principles are the same, but the techniques may change.
That's what I find so encouraging. And I've spoke with Lauren Johnson on the podcast before. If you've heard, she was the performance coach for the New York Yankees. And I think the conversation I came away from her is just simplifying it is actually demystifying high performance, and all of the individual components is actually where it really lies. And you're right in many ways. It's difficult if we look at it from our point of view at Omnia Performance, from a strength and conditioning point of view, is if you look at the individual components of creating performance metrics in terms of physiological adaptation, in terms of the energy systems that need developed, in terms of how to balance those things concurrently, that's what we specialize in doing. And you don't necessarily need to have competed in the Ironman World Championships to be able to understand that to be able to get to the Ironman World Championships, you need to be able to develop yourself across X, Y, and Z. Is it very useful to have experience of competing in Ironmans and knowing how to attack the technicality and the transitions and have the strategy and the little tricks of the trade that go with it? Absolutely. But in terms of the pure data metric manipulation, it's a lot more simple than people give it credit for. It's actually just guiding the roadmap and taking away the guessing that is where people find themselves in the spin. So the results that you created in these teams, were there any real light bulb moments for players or groups that you can recall? I'm not sure if you're exactly allowed to share them name by name, but are there any moments where there was something that just turned in somebody's head, or something that someone realized that actually unlocked a new performance level for them, or a better period of play, or a better string of results. Because I've had little bits of advice over the years from a business point of view that have changed my life the following week, and they often, more often than not, are just making things really clear and really simple. And you go, oh, of course. I mean, maybe, did I know that deep down? I think I did know that deep down. But now that you've said it, as somebody that I respect, and you've given me a bit of a thread to pull on in terms of how to actually apply that, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, I look back and I'm like, why was I not doing this the whole time? So are there any examples where it's been that simple to change a high performer's outcomes?
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned the word respect. I think that, I don't want to say that's a given, but yeah, if you don't have that, or you can't develop that, and that comes about by, back to this word, being authentic, like being yourself, not pretending to, not, separating image and identity. But yeah, there's been a few, like one at for example, at the Niners, I used, I think it was 3 slides were all I used. One was, I give the example of 2 brothers, Horace and Harvey Grant, who played in the NBA. This was the starting of the presentation. First week, guys didn't know me, and put it up, and I showed how long Horace and Harvey played in the league. Now, one had played for, I think, 11 years, and the other played for 17. I forget the numbers. The guy who played for 11 years made, I don't know, $40 million. The guy who played for 17 years made $77 million. And my point was, if you want to look after your family, look after your loved ones, have a comfortable life beyond this sport, what's the message here? Stay in the sport as long as possible. Okay. So if you want to stay in the sport as long as possible, eat broccoli. And it was a joke. It was a piece of broccoli sitting in a sauna. I have the image. But the point was, do the basics. And then the last slide was a line from Jay-Z. I'm not a businessman. I'm a businessman. You're your own business. Like you, linebacker, quarterback, whatever. You're a business. So you have to consider yourself a business. Stay in this league as long as possible so you can look after your loved ones. You and eat freaking broccoli. That was the starting point. And that, those basic things. And you're right. A lot of the time it's about simplifying things. Now, it must be robust. As you're explaining something, you can't say on Monday, eat broccoli, and then the following week say, well, you got to do this. You need to know exactly what you're going to say. And but a lot of it is about simplifying things, because the people that you're working with, particularly in sport, like they've got 3 or 4 other coaches in their ear. Skills coach, position coach, coordinator, people you work with. It doesn't matter, even in the business world, they've got managers, leaders, they've got company-wide, or if you're working with someone one-on-one, they've got family, they've got relationships. So you need to keep it as simple as possible. Have that trust, and keep it as simple as possible, and build on it.
Yeah, because I mean, what jumped out to me there is you've probably got an IFA in your ear saying, you know what, if you've made $40 million in 11 years, you can probably invest it in this way, and if you put it into the S&P and maybe buy into NVIDIA early on, then you can turn it into this, and then actually if you last that long, then it doesn't matter how sustainable you are because you've already done it, you've ticked the box. But all that does is that gives an opening in the door for the standards to drop, doesn't it? And if you just set essentially my takeaway, which I'm hoping I've discerned correctly from that specific angle, was if you want to survive in this game, the standards need to be high, and you are in control of those standards. And that, as a mantra, all of the other voices, if you view it through that lens, all of those voices are valuable and aren't inherently contradictory, but more something that you can view through the lens of, does this fit with the standards that I believe that I fall within? And therefore you can make a decision from there. Because I assume in your trade, your skill set, the worst way to get results out of people, or the biggest mistake to be made, would be telling them exactly what to do. I almost view it in a similar, like the role of a therapist isn't to tell you how to fix your life. They're to hold your hand through the garden, so to speak, as you sort of unpack it yourself. And I guess that's almost in many ways what you're trying to do, is you're trying to help these malleable individuals unlock things that they probably already know, but for them to view it in a way that makes sense to them, so that they can take the action to discover the sustainable habits and behaviors that they need to maintain to continue to be the best version of themselves. And then that means that once that develops within them, if that develops within the next 13, and then one bad egg comes along, they'll be absorbed in to the 15, and then that ratio continues. Is that's effectively the way to view things, is it?
Yeah, I would say it's fair to say that in professional sport, you're probably dealing with a few more egos than in the Gen Pop. So you're right. Like it's very difficult to come in with a sledgehammer and say you must do this. So depending on the personality, where the person is, then you're going to present the same information, but in a slightly different way. And you're also going to look for or try and understand what's the most important thing to this person. Like one English, probably, I don't know, probably in the top 20 most capped English soccer players, but to him at that point, his kids were the most important thing. So the lifestyle habits that I would suggest to him, the carrot was around, these are things you should do. Oh no, by the way, they'd be good for your kids as well to engage in. Oh, we can do this as a family. Diet changes life. So, yeah. But if you know what the most important thing is to someone, then you have the opportunity to find alignment. And that's what great organizations do. You've got a common alignment. You demonstrate how achieving goals as a team are going to support your personal goals. And it's the same thing.
Would you mind if we played a bit of role play?
Sure.
So we'll do two examples at opposing ends of the spectrum, and I'd be very interested to know how you would approach, as you said, delivering the same information differently to these two examples. So this is off the cuff, so bear with me in my my imagination here.
With me.
But young professional footballer, not top league, but by no means sort of bottom league. Big ego, plays up front, thinks that his only role in life is to score goals and that everything else is secondary to that. So strength and conditioning, interacting with the team, being a leader is all secondary because it's all about him. Everyone gets the ball to him so that he can score the goals. What is the main thing to do in football? You want to score goals, therefore people give me the ball, I score the goals, I'm the most important. Friction develops because that person isn't as bought into the holistic workings of the football team and the community that goes with it. And therefore, to bring out the best of this individual in the long term, he needs to understand that there is more to just scoring goals, to continue to score goals for a long period of time and to bring out the best results for the team so that people can get the ball to him, so that everything can be maintained, goalkeeper keeps a clean sheet, etc., etc. How would you... Do you want the second example first, or should we just attack that one first?
Let's see if we can get through this one first.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's just the contrast. But essentially, hopefully that paints a picture of a sort of type of personality, which I can imagine is quite common in different areas. And then I've got an inverse that I'd like to explore afterwards.
Yeah, if you're in there's a number of ways that you could approach it. If you've got a very good culture and you've got one or two role models, you might, either use them or use them as examples and explain what the key characteristics, key behaviors are that allowed that person become great. And I'm thinking actually of an NFL case where with a legendary player, rookie comes in, and in this case it didn't work, but you're trying to explain to the rookie, look beyond the headlines he's getting and look at what he's doing at 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning when you're not getting out of bed. That's one. The other approach might be to use examples of players who had, wonderful starts, or as we call them, strawberry seasons. They had a wonderful first season and then failed, and why, and try and explain why these things are important, and particularly around working with teammates. One of the things that's difficult with veterans from time to time, depends on the organization. Sometimes veterans don't want to help the rookie, because they're going, this dude's coming for my shirt. But those are two ways. One of the things, I stole it from Phil Jackson. That sounds arrogant, but I have a huge library of biographies, relatively easy to read, and I would try and either, if I thought that would land with the player, I would do that, or I would use a documentary or a video to try and plant a seed. And it would be a case of, hey, this would be fun for you to have a read, and then I would walk away. Don't try and drive it home. Let the seed. With that kind of player who's that little bit of arrogance, the idea is going to have to come from them. So those are some of the ways that I might approach that kind of situation.
And I guess the biography example is great because, like we said earlier, you'd give them a biography of somebody that you know that they'd respect, which means that the archetypal biographical presentation that they would hopefully read, they feel that they're falling short of this person that they view themselves to be.
Yeah, or if there was, but there probably is, a Netflix about Gaza, might be an example of, talent, unfulfilled talent, or whatever. So something like that, where you would go, hey, did you get a chance to watch that? What'd you think? Yeah, man, he was incredible. And then you'd drop in. Could you imagine how good he could have been if, he had done this, done that? Those are the kind of things. But again, to the point you made earlier, you can't just, everybody is coming to that kid telling him what he's doing wrong. You're not going to get anywhere. You're just another voice,
Okay, fantastic. So, other end of the spectrum, talented young player in whatever sport it may be that definitely has the minerals to be where they are as a professional. They do everything off the pitch correctly. They're up in the morning, they're doing their S&C, they're eating the right things, they're reading the right things, they're communicating the right things, they're always on time, they're ticking all the boxes, they're fully bought in, but their performance in terms of measurable metrics, goals scored, runs scored, touchdowns scored, assists required, whatever it needs to be, are falling short of where they would be expected to be. And they just can't figure out how to bring out that physical, measurable performance in themselves. How would you explore that as a alternative?
Yeah, the first question would be why is it a case that perhaps, and this is very common because you do have, some young kids that would put, no matter how dedicated you or I were in our youth, they would put us to shame in terms of their discipline and their structure. And sometimes I think that there are some young kids who force themselves too much without being able to manage chaos and enjoy life. So the first question would be, why are they not? Is it a stress thing? Is it a psychology thing? In some other cases, it might be that the metrics that they're judging themselves by, or they're being judged by, are inaccurate. And that happens quite a bit. So that would be the first question I would have. A lot of gym scores, fitness scores, have no transfer to performance on the field. So I would start with the performance on the field and work backwards and go, okay, let's just look at the game and let's figure out why it's not delivering on the game, and let's work backwards from that. Forget about your bench press for a little bit. Forget about your what do you call it, yo-yo test or whatever, beep test. Let's focus on the performance, the game day performance, because at the end of the day, that's the only thing that matters. And let's concentrate on that, and let's concentrate on the scrimmage or the practice, and let's just concentrate on improving that. But a lot of times it's anxiety with young players. They have put so much emphasis on delivering performance in practice and in training that the game, by the time they get to the game, they're exhausted, rather than seeing the training process as preparation for the ultimate assessment, which is on game day.
I can understand that in many ways, because you're just burning, the fire's burning too aggressively where you've got nothing left when it actually needs to be burning. I guess is kind of the way of looking at it.
Like in your case, like have you ever had the instance where performing and training becomes almost the main focus? It becomes so important that you've turned up for events and underperformed in hindsight when you look back?
I'm trying to think of, the most recent example is training for the 250 kilometer in one go run. Business, lots of very exciting things going on, which just means that actually, the sort of misconception online that I just train as an athlete full time, which isn't the case, unfortunately. 12-hour days, 13-hour days in here pretty consistently, and my love for training as an escape from the day-to-day kind of disappeared a few years ago because it's now very much part of the job. But that doesn't mean that I can't find love for training when it's in a healthy structure week to week. But for the first half of this year, I think things have been so busy that I've been struggling to find training anything other than ticking a box or sending an email in some ways at points. And I think the anxiety and stress and absolute scrap I had to go with myself to get to the start line of the 250 from December through to March, with a lot of variables along the way, lots of travel and lots of things that just made it very difficult. It meant that the standards that I am confident I would have held myself to in better circumstances didn't necessarily show up on the day when it came to performing in the event. And that's mainly with things like setting a specific amount of time I would allocate myself at a rest stop and then getting on with it, rather than going with the flow, as I ended up doing on the day. But that's because I think that the emotional spikes and the psychological challenges I faced along the way, which I dealt with, but I didn't deal with quite as well, and there was a little bit more drama and intensity around them than I expected there to be, was a reflection of my prep and my headspace in the event, which came from failing to discern boundaries between all of the components that kind of fed into what this thing was. And again, it's a weird example because there's a commercial element to how well does the video perform, how do we sort of tell the right story and narrative. But I always want to be athlete first, intrinsically driven, everything else second. Whereas I think this time is the first time that I've kind of really, really had to wrestle consistently to get that right. So I think in terms of, would I have done things differently in prep? If we'd had a bigger cash runway and lots of more staff, then yes, but we didn't. It was a reflection of the circumstances. That's the thing. But I think what I wish I'd done a little bit differently is probably been more honest and aware of the headspace that I was in going into it, because I think I caught myself a little bit off guard with the emotional spikes that came, because I maybe arrogantly, maybe experientially backed myself to tolerate whatever came through experience, but it was much more unpleasant in some ways than I thought it would have been. And ultimately I did. I backed myself and got through it. But there were points where I know, looking back, I'm like, you could have just been a bit happier at that point. You maybe didn't need to let that thought spiral. You maybe didn't need to let the emotions of that win over. You didn't need to stop for 30 minutes there. That could have been 10 minutes. And again, you don't get many dry runs at running 250k in one go, so I can look at this now critically, but it's that was a reflection of my headspace. So I think that's kind of the opposite of what you asked in many ways, but that's the one that I'm still asking questions about myself day to day now, because I'm really trying to reconnect with that boundary between training and work for the love of it rather than for the job of it, so to speak.
It reminds me of my I was teaching. I took a career break to take my very first job with Bolton Wanderers. So, like, my routine would be, when I get a spare bit of time, I'd, go to a coffee shop maybe with 3 or 4 academic papers on physiology. I'd sit down and read them, and I'd go home and I'd do more work. So anyway, finish a day, first week at Bolton Wanderers, 3 or 4 papers, go to Starbucks. At 7 or 8 in the evening, I sit down to read these papers. And my brain is fried, and I'm going, my hobby has now become my job. This isn't an escape anymore, and it's finding that balance. But when you got to the start line, what was your Like, what was your frame of mind when you got to the start line?
Whether this was a mistake or not, I'm not sure. But everything felt very normal because we started here. We started in the office, so we had everything laid out in the office. The start line was walk 2 minutes down the road to the Union Canal here in Edinburgh and get going from there. And whilst that made me very comfortable, maybe it disarmed me a little bit because it felt normal. And then 80k later, when I'd been on my own for 13 hours at that point, give or take, not quite, I'd been on my own for about 10 hours, and maybe, this isn't normal. You've caught yourself out here. So if I could summarize it in one word, my headspace in general was scatty. It was all over the place. I wasn't lasered in on the task at hand. I didn't feel like everything was as structured and planned, and I wasn't as confident in all of the systems at play as I would have been in previous events. That was a reflection of lots of many variables that you can't square the circle of in this just general day-to-day business operations, training, life stuff that led into it. But I think we would have done some things differently if we had it all over again. But I think, my headspace going into it, and my headspace kind of ever since, to be honest, has been a little bit chaotic. And I think a big lesson learned from spending so much time on my own is a big reflection on environment for me. So action being taken on it, moving out of the suburbs that we're in currently, about half an hour from the office here, back to the city centre of Edinburgh, less space, but better location, which ironically for the direction we want future family and things to go in is the complete inverse. But if it frees me up to be a better performing version of myself, then that means that all of the things that are kind of complete core components of our day-to-day will be happier, healthier, and therefore should lead to better outcomes in all measurable metrics. But there's a lot of stress associated with that. There's a lot of conservative general thought that is kind of constantly whispering in my ear. It's kind of the well, if you look at this logically, why would you do this? But and then for me, it's spending more time in London because I get a lot from being in the chaos and the stress of London, but I wouldn't dipping in and out. So I'll probably rent there somewhere as a base. But that's not in any way to say that I didn't enjoy spending all that time on my own in the Scottish Highlands, which I still very much love, but more just for the day-to-day friction reduction so that I can reconnect, so that I can create the time to reconnect with the outdoors and my training for those things in and of themselves. I feel like I've needed a significant environmental shift. That's in progress rather. But I think, my mind has been, well, I'd say, when was the turning point? Honestly, I think it's never really come back from doing 2022 double Ironman distance triathlon. And I'll be entirely honest, and I've never actually said this publicly before, I think there's a part of me that has kind of ran out of goals that I really genuinely care about because I've boxed off a lot of the things that were exciting to me. I'm trying to pull on the threads of things that on premise feel exciting, but when the momentum starts to build, I just don't feel that connection to them that I used to with previous events that I've done and things. I don't know why that is. So it's an interesting one. I think it might be an environmental shift. It might be the fact that actually I've just pivoted into more of a commercial role, which I get a lot of enjoyment and buzz from and very much view things in the same analytical sense. But at the core of that is my sort of individual performance, and that's something I definitely want to push and is core to me. But it's, I guess it's how do I reconnect with the not the spark, but the flame that drew me to this world in the first place, which is that passion for individual physiological progress and forward motion physically, as well as in an entrepreneurial setting, I guess. And at the moment, it feels like a spark or a pilot light rather than a flame. But what I will say, I was over in Mallorca week before last, kind of working holiday, and the freedom to just get up and drive to a world-class facility, because there's lots of them over there, just to train for the fun of it, documenting and filming stuff as I went, but because it was in a different environment, it was out with a regular workday pattern, I did get that sort of teenage buzz back a little bit. So exactly what action there is to take from that in my day-to-day, I don't know. I think practically it's things like I'm not starting my long runs on a Saturday morning out from my front door. I'm driving to a location to start them from there. I'm going to make a conscious effort to go to different gyms rather than just use the one that we've just got out there, just because it's a bit of an environmental shift and there's more people around. But yeah, there's a lot that I'm kind of unpacking on that topic so that I can get back to my own version of high performance. But I think what I've not done very well with is be completely realistic about how much more leadership and commercial time is allocated to the things that used to be allocated to other things. And my frustration of not being able to allocate the same amount of time to those things is actually impractical, because the time is all filled. It's not like I'm sitting on my arse for 12 hours a day. It's very much a case of just being realistic about it. But it's the push and the pull. It's the push and the pull. And trying to find that balance, I know, brings out the best in me. But it's just kind of been a bit of a seesaw ever since September 2022. Where I fought through a summer of training that I don't really know how I fought through, practically speaking, to get to the finish line of a double Ironman. But there's a lot there. This is kind of ironically turned into a Fergus analysis session, which is a double entendre in this case.
Fergus.
Fergus analysing, but there's a lot there, I'd imagine, yeah.
No, there's a few things there. I think that, I think people, a lot of people, either aren't aware of or ignore the ergonomics that you talk about, the ergonomics of their day and getting to training, getting to practice and what they're going to do, and the roadblocks that they can create for themselves. One of the mistakes I used to make was I would find an apartment that literally I could crawl out of bed and climb, jump a rooftop to get to work. And over time, then you realize the further away, the more time you have to decompress, and that can be a really helpful thing. Even just getting to sleep. I could be at home in 15 minutes. Well, you're not going to wind down, in 15 minutes. It's great for getting to work in the morning. So small things like that, just the ergonomics, like how you set up your day, your travel, your journey to and from, can have a massive impact on it. I think the other thing that you're having fun with right now is discovering the true reason behind why you took on all of those things and what that's going to look like. So the action, what it fed or feeds you and has done, what that truly is, what that fulfillment is. So I think it sounds like you're going on a very fun journey.
I'd call it that. I would, no, it is, and there's very much happy and good days, but there are bad days where I really do just think why am I not as excited about these things? Because at the core of it, like I said earlier, I'm not simply interested in getting faster or stronger. Yeah. And I think that's actually that's my issue, is that my life would be a lot simpler if I could simply just do a faster Ironman. Oh, great. Look at the joy that comes from that. But again, I've got friends that own stupid cars that said they got their first mad car and the feeling from there has never been the same as it was getting the first one. And that's kind of how I feel in some ways, where training for me, and the most enjoyment I've got from any strength discipline in my whole life, in fact, is picking up the Dinny stones, which are 332 kilo. Yeah, pick those up. 12 people sat around a park bench in Aberdeenshire. Very different to World Powerlifting Championships in Las Vegas. But the enjoyment and fulfillment I got from that as a sort of sense of adventure and accomplishment was tenfold. Genuinely, completely different.
But that's the key. It's what does it mean to you, internally, and what did all those different things. I think there's one common thing that it feeds in you, that you can, like you said, doing something like that. Most people wouldn't even know what the Dinny Stones are. I'm fortunate I've watched one or two documentaries, but being able to, that fulfillment and sense of satisfaction. I always talk to people about the value of something. The price and the worth is what somebody pays for it, what somebody else sees or whatever. But the value is intangible, and that's different. What's that impact? And I think a lot of high performers go through that pivot where the action they start to separate the action from the value, or the price from the value, the worth from the value.
I think that's definitely the journey that I'm on, and it is fun, but it's also frustrating because it's I still enjoy my training. Don't get me wrong. It's confusing. Yeah, it's confusing is the word. Confusing is the word. Correct. It's just the case. I don't wake up with that absolute excitement to attack the goal that I'm currently training for, and I do think there's a part of me that's kind of because there might be a complacency that's sat in that I can just kind of bank on my base to kind of train for 3 months and kind of do most of the things that I'd want to do, which has come through years and years of hard work and being laser focused, albeit. But I don't like the fact that it's.
I was going to ask you about that. Like when you turn up at the start line, like you had all of these disruptions and things, and you still managed to get it done. Like that's impressive. You know that. That's why I was asking you how you felt when you got to the start line and things felt normal. 10, 11 hours in, you're going, oh, sugar, like this is tough. But you still managed to get it done.
There's a part of me that there is a part of me that wishes I'd failed.
Yes, that's where I was going. That's where I was going with it. That because it would have been just. Is that the wrong word to use? But it would have been. Yeah, it would have made sense in my mind because I could have then looked at all the variables as rather than just stumbling blocks. I could have looked at them as the reasons why I couldn't get this thing done. But I think that's I don't want. There isn't an ascending ladder to climb here. I mean, this is a K. I mean, what next? 500K Everest. Okay, let's do K2 in the winter. Where does this go? Yeah. And that's genuinely not something that I'm interested in. I want to have a family that I'm here for and available and all of these things. But I think it's the beauty of the way that I train is I can pivot into pretty much any direction that I want to. I'm currently training for a sub 3 hour marathon. I'm really enjoying the flexibility of being able to just lace up my running trainers and get going. Versus triathlon, which is an antisocial pain in the arse. But in terms of my lifting goals at the moment, there's not a huge amount that's getting me really, truly excited because I want to do more strongman stuff, but that's very, very impractical on a day-to-day basis and requires quite a lot of time. But yeah, it's just a funny one. I am confident. My current hypothesis is environment shift will be the first domino to put me in a better headspace to unpack this properly so that I can then sort of unravel the answers. But I think for a while I've been repressing the environmental action that I can take or not considering the things that have maybe been bothering me more than I'd accept that they were because I've been trying to logic my way out of the situation where I look at the living situation that we have currently. On paper, there is no reason to disrupt that, even down to the time that we have a fixed mortgage until. There's loads of things you can. Well, why all these things that you analyze, but the human being at the center of that, Erin being included, my wife and our 2 dogs, she's very much sort of in the same headspace as we are. Just not being able to walk to a coffee shop for a flat white and a croissant on a Sunday is something that's kind of been irking us. Which means that our habits have defaulted to, because we have to get in the car to do anything with the dogs, we inherently just don't do the things with the dogs. We'll just walk them around the block instead on a Sunday. And the compounding effects of that over time puts me in this environment where I'm kind of in work, out of work. We've created a place where we don't need to leave the premises to pretty much do all my training other than swimming. We don't have an infinity pool in here just yet, and probably don't have any plans to for the water bill either. But I think that's maybe why I like spending time in London, because there's more variety, different working locations, all these things. So I think for me, it's environmental shift will be the first domino that should create a topple effect. But I've got a lot of ideas of things that I want to sort of do, but they're not massive fitness goals. They're more storytelling, narrative focused. Like I ran across Ibiza the other day, and that was all very run and gun. It was me and a GoPro and a drone. Could have done the video a lot better had I had a team there, but that would have been $1,000 for the day and lots of planning and logistics and all that sort of stuff. So I just did it on myself. But again, I went to Ibiza and ran across an island. That's kind of fun. Luxembourg isn't all that big a country.
could be fun to actually go and come up with a production to sort of use the fitness for the adventure side of things. I think that is the thing for me, is I need to find, how do I elicit that sense of adventure through training, because I am aware I am not driven to simply being stronger or faster. And while some of the adventure might come with being stronger or faster, it's only worth being stronger or faster if it is part of an adventure process. So yeah, there's a lot that I'm unpacking, but as you said, it's a confusing but rewarding and necessary process. And again, at the core of all of this is a real big period of business change, very exciting business change, but training and environmental shift aside, we're sort of really bashing on the ceiling currently to break through to the next level, which in and of itself is a very stressful period. So
yeah, well, I think, wasn't it John Lennon said, life's what happens when we're busy making plans.
Yep. Yeah, that's it, isn't it? I think that the one thing I've tried to be a lot better with this year, and I'm definitely feeling the results of, is being a little bit more spontaneous with social interactions or with training or with stuff like that. Like if I'd looked at my training plan for the week, running 50k across Ibiza on a Thursday definitely wasn't part of it. But had I passed up that opportunity to be a little bit more spontaneous, it's a weird way of being spontaneous. Most people think going for 6 beers on a Thursday, but here we are. So I think it's I know that I'm currently not performing at my highest level. I felt what it's like. I'd like to get back to it, and there's lots of things that I'm trying to unpack, and I can kind of see the sort of glimmers of them through the clouds, but it's kind of, how do I just separate those clouds, which I think, in theory, I've got the first domino, as I've said, toppling on. But that was quite a brain dump for me there. So I appreciate you listening.
One of the things is that, with a lot of high performers, one of the questions I end up exploring most with people is, what's your definition of success? And, I think, like, if you'd asked me when I was younger, it would have been this job, that job, this role, whatever. But that change, like, you assume that and you follow it blindly without actually asking, no, what is my definition of success? It's so different for everybody else, and how does that change? And so, and you talk of, like, success for you is running with a GoPro across Ibiza. Like, it's that adventure. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's part of that success, having the flexibility to do that. And so, yes, it's different for everybody. And a lot of people just follow blindly, like a professional image of what it's expected to be, as opposed to truly going, no. I know what it is to me, and that's what I'm going to follow.
It's exactly that. I do a lot of speaking in schools and corporates, and that's one of the core questions that I put on the screen, and I actually encourage interaction on exactly that, because it's often so linear. It's current account balance related, or it's ISA balance related, or pension, or how much your house is worth, all these traditional things that people are just fed. But so much of the pressure that I put on myself is to, again, maybe it's a strange way of viewing things, because it's almost, again, it's falling into the trap of living once you retire, in terms of offsetting to the future, which I'm not trying to do, but it's trying to do all the work that I can now so that I can explore that spontaneous adventure with children when they arrive. I would love to be in a position where I can be financially flexible and individually flexible enough to be able to do what I want with my kids, because that sounds really fucking fun, to be honest. Yeah. So that's kind of where a lot of the inputs into all of this confusion currently, down to leaving a bigger house with a garden to a smaller place without one in Edinburgh, starts to not make sense on paper, because you're thinking, well, if you're setting yourself up for a future with, well, surely you wouldn't. It's just all these little things that are sort of going on at the moment that's making it a fascinating conundrum. But again, double brutal Ironman in September 2022. My biggest takeaway from that is how confused I was at having got to the start line. The finish line was irrelevant. Getting to the start line within the sort of 4 months of prep required, the pressure that I felt there and the outcomes of that pressure that were then disseminated into working patterns, business systems, how I live day to day, have made me much better. So I'm confident that this pressure and squeeze that I'm currently feeling, downstream of that, once all these solutions are active, albeit with solicitors and all that bullshit to deal with as well. It's there'll be a better the high performance feeling that I'm looking for is right around the corner. But it's just a really, having been somebody, I'd say 3 times in my life who has felt completely unstoppable. AS level exams. I just completely became obsessed, lasered in, existed like a podcast, toxic internet bro, long before that was a thing. And then training for the double brutal, and then early starting the businesses. It was just complete blackout monk mode existing, and then training for the double brutal. Those are the 3 times I've looked back and I'm like, how are you this? Like, I'd almost watch videos of myself being like, I don't recognize who this person is currently. So I've had that feeling 3 times in my life, and I'm always kind of trying to get back to that because I know what comes on the other side, and I'm happy in those positions. I think it's really I'm happy now, but I sort of, that high performance dragon that I'm chasing is
but as you know, like, I mean, that the upside and the downside is you don't remove, you eliminate every other distraction possible. You laser in on one thing, and you can achieve so much. For how long is questionable, but then you got to come back to the real world and balance out all of the things. And so what you're trying to do now is possibly across 2 or 3 different things, keep that laser focus on 3 things at one time, which is, again, difficult to do. It's hard to do, but it's probably healthier in the long run.
Yeah. And again, even if it takes a bit longer, the lessons that I'll be learning along the way by being in that pressure cooker for a bit longer will probably be better learnt at the back end. And I think that's what I'm trying to... pressure is a privilege. Phrase I learned from Gaz. Very fortunate to be experiencing the stresses that I am. A lot of them are completely self-inflicted. A lot of them are within my control. A lot of them I could just say, fuck off, you know what, I'm not going to deal with this anymore, and cancel that contract, or get rid of this, or don't explore that option. They're all things that I could just say, nope. But I'm pulling the thread on all of them and feeling the stress of all of them because I see what lies on the other side as a positive thing to do. And that comes from experience of having sort of been calculated and backing myself in that conundrum in the past. What I'm feeling the most at the moment is the fear that I get it wrong. In this sort of house move, I'll admit at the core of all that is probably where that feeling's coming from, because I think that's one of the, if not the most stressful thing secondary to divorce, I think, in the UK in terms of statistical analysis for people having downturns.
Death, divorce, and moving house. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Those are the so I think maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's forcing a lot of things that I've been tucking away in the back of my mind for a while without the stress to sort of come to the surface. But I think it's for the first time in my life, it's I'm being forced to reflect on the way that I exist from every angle, the longevity of myself and the interactions with the things that I have, because I'm currently wrestling with something that for my whole life has been very important to me, sport, training. And I'm having to almost find a reason to love it as much as I once did, which is pissing me off because I know and experience day to day that I do love it. But going to Mallorca to enjoy it rather than running out my front door is not a sustainable way to make that happen. So, as you said, what is the value? What is the why? How do has that evolved? How much has that evolved? Well, it has evolved, definitely, I'd say. How much has that evolved? What has it evolved into? Get the answer to that question, and I'll probably be back to the clarity that I know is available for me. But you need to be dealt a few punches before you come out smiling, I guess.
We'll do that in the next podcast when you've got all of those answers.
Yeah, that's it. This is the free psychoanalysis. This is great. With my AI version of myself in the future.
No, but I think that like all of those questions, it's like you're repurposing everything. Like, because you're not eliminating anything, you're just moving. I talk to a lot of people about, like, their life is a jigsaw that they've put together. Well, you're just changing the pieces. You're not adding any new. You're just moving the pieces around to get a more refined version, and that's kind of what you're doing. You're repurposing things. But I love the way you talk. talk about like the ergonomics and the environment, because people completely underestimate that, and underestimate the importance and the impact that it can have,
Well, Dr. Fergus, I'm going to emphasize that because it really reassures me. If you think that I'm thinking about it in the right way, then that will genuinely help me sleep at night tonight. So there we go. Thank you very much. No, that was, generally fascinating, but personally very, very valuable for me. So thank you very, very much. Where is the best place for people to find more about yourself and, more importantly, your books?
Yeah, my website, fergusconnolly.com. Just everything's there. It's just one-stop shop. That's it.
I'm sure that took a few rounds of repurposing, but there we go. Thank you very much. Again, really appreciated that. And during a period of confusion, that's been very selfishly valuable for me too.
Appreciate it. Humbled and honoured. Thank you for having me on. Even if I'm 200 and something guests after Gaz.
What are we now, Jamie? It's not quite 200. This is number 110, so you're 108 after Gaz. Okay. But Gaz came after Roman Kemp, so in terms of celebrity status, Gaz was very much stuffed down into a bottom of the pile there. But very different subject matter, obviously. So it's very very similar in many ways in terms of, again, simplifying the complex and taking action on the simplified version of the complex, doing those reps over and over again, but then before you know it, you'll be in a better place. So fantastic. Thank you again.
Thanks, Fergus.